Welcome to the Wings Over New Zealand show with Dave Homewood.
Welcome to the Wings Over New Zealand show. I'm your host, Dave Homewood. In this episode, we're talking about the Avro 626, a very interesting 1935 trainer that the RNZAF used. And in 1985, one of them flew again after a restoration.
The only one.
The only one. So with me today on the show, we've got 6 members of the team who were involved with it. And I'll just go around the room. We've got Tony Chippendale.
Alias Chips. Still employed, unfortunately. I'm presently the airworthiness manager for the B300 fleet the Air Force operate.
Right.
Yeah, so worked on the Avro project for about 4.5 years. I took over from Red Redmond when he had his accident. So,
right.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed my time with the team.
Yeah, and we've got Red Redmond here. Rene Redmond, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Dave. It's good to see all you guys here, especially some old faces. Jord Backer especially. We go back to Woodburn days.
Yep.
So what am I currently doing? I'm retired, but I'm still working with Model Flying New Zealand. I manage all the large radio control model aircraft from 25 to 150 kilo. Going back to my Air Force experiences with the Avro, I was picked by Jim. I was probably the first guy on the project. Okay. Unfortunately, I only lasted about 5 or 6 months before I dived into a river and terminated my Air Force career. So that was my introduction. And I'm sure we'll talk more about what happened during that time.
Sure.
Shortly.
Yeah, and you mentioned we've got Shord Backer here, or Chewy. What are you up to these days?
Sherwood, you're looking a bit older than when I last saw you. Why is that?
Yeah, well, it comes from working, We all get older.
Yeah.
I'm the second oldest person at work now.
Well,
What's this work you speak of?
Yes, it's, pays the bills.
Mugskin.
The money's good, so why would I give it up? And it's a good crowd to work with, so I don't mind.
That's good. Are you still at the engine centre, or?
Yep, I'm still on the recon.
Okay.
Still working on the V's, and we're getting ready. We're gearing up for the geared turbofans.
Okay.
I'm actually restoring vintage woodworking tools at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, right.
I do it at work, and then I come home and do it all over again. What we say at work, what we're doing is when we repair engines, we make shiny. If it's not serviceable unless it's shiny. So we spend all the time polishing and blending and doing that to make everything shiny.
Right.
But,
And we've got Paul McSweeney here. Hi, Paul.
G'day, Dave. How are you?
Good. And you're now retired. You were well known for Pioneer Aero, but you're no longer tinkering with aeroplanes.
No, I gave that up 3.5 years ago, and now retired in sunny Whangamata.
Right.
So nice. Just about to shift into a new house, which has been a long time coming. But we're on the home straight now, and we'll soon be living on the hill with a view rather than stuck in the suburbs in a little 2-bedroom batch. It'll be nice.
Excellent. And we've got John Lanham. Hi, John.
Hi, Dave, and everybody. Nice to be with you. I often think about the good old Avro times and see some of you pop up on Facebook, especially Buck, pops up from time to time. Yep. I suppose you'd say I'm retired, but I'm still flying, still got a medical, thank goodness, and involved now with a number of organisations. Peter Jackson's collection at Masterton, still very much involved with that. Wairarapa Flying Tigers, instructing on Tigers, Chipmunk, and a member of New Zealand Aviation Federation, which is all the you might say all the sport and recreation groups, and the Airshow Association, which was formed to bring some rigor both to operations and to financial management of air shows. So between all that, keeping interested in aviation and reasonably busy.
Right, excellent. And we've got Buck Harrison. Hi, Buck.
G'day, Dave. It's
And
good to see all the old faces. I shouldn't use that term, I guess. Yeah, as I mentioned before, been in retirement since 2012 when I left Shuey and the boys to the engine shop, the Christchurch Engine Centre, and I bailed out and decided it's better off travelling the world. And we built a new house a couple of years ago on a couple of acres of mountain views in Darfield, which sadly is, like everywhere else, has attracted people from all places, and it's now being built out quite a bit, losing our wee village feel. But yeah, we try and travel a lot. We've got a camper van and get away. Certainly not at the moment. It was a -2 frost out there this morning. Lovely day though. But yeah, keeping busy. I've still got 4 or 5 classic cars that I potter away on and go on a lot of events on. So that keeps me out of trouble too. But I'm always, as you say, pretty busy. I don't know how I manage work and shift work at the engine centre. But never mind. Yeah, it's good to see all the faces. I won't use the term old. And see how we go.
awesome.
Cheers.
Okay, well, welcome, guys. And we will just give a bit of a brief overview of the Avro 66 as a type. First flew in 1930 in Britain, designed and built by Avro, and our ones were ordered. They ordered 4 of them in 1934. They were basically purchased to replace the obsolete Bristol Fighters and to work alongside the Hawker Tomtits in training aircrew. They arrived in September 1935 aboard the SS Middlesex. At the same time as when the purchase was made for the Avros, the government also bought 12 Vickers Vildebeests, which were the first New Zealand bombers, and the first new trainers to really enter the RNZAF in the post New Zealand Permanent Air Force days. So it was a bit of an upgrade, and the actual Avro 66 was considered a well, the newspapers of the day called it the last word in aircraft training. They were quite an amazing aircraft, really, for the time. They had a wingspan of 34 feet, length of 26 feet 6 inches, height of 9 feet 7 inches, maximum speed 130 miles per hour. The cruising speed was 108, and at that cruising speed, it had a range of 2 hours 33 minutes. One comment I saw in an old newspaper was the cross-country range could be increased by a further 2 hours. I'm not sure how they did that. Maybe John has some idea.
I think there was an auxiliary tank possibility somewhere that could be.
Okay, that makes sense. Yep. The landing speed, according to one of the newspaper reports, was just 50 miles an hour, which is quite slow. Rate of climb 1,000 feet per minute. The service ceiling was 16,800 feet. It was powered by an Armstrong Cheetah 5 air-cooled engine, and I've seen various numbers, but generally about 270 horsepower for the Cheetah 5. And of course, we had a lot of Cheetahs in the RNZAF in that sort of 1930s, 40s era with the Anson and the Oxford. But the Anson had the Cheetah 9, which is 350 horsepower, and the Oxford had the Cheetah 10, which is 340 horsepower. So they were much more powerful engines than the 5. The Avro had a Ferry Reed propeller and tail wheel and hydraulic brakes. And interestingly, the Vildebeests and the Avros were sort of the first aircraft in New Zealand that actually had a tail wheel. Before that, all the aircraft had tail skids. So that was a bit of an innovation at the time. The role of the Avro was dual control flying instruction, blind flying and night flying, offensive gunnery with the Vickers gun or the camera gun, defensive gunnery with the Vickers gun or camera gun, bombing by the observer in a prone position, bombing by pilot. So there's two different types of bombing there. Wireless telegraphy and telephony using two-way radio equipment operating in either short or medium wavelengths. Aerial photography and survey work. Navigation, which apparently at the time we had very elaborate navigating gear, which included navigating at night, and picking up messages as well. So there's a lot of different roles there that this little aircraft had, which is quite amazing.
They could also do casualty evacuation.
Yes.
Oh, really? Okay, interesting.
A stretcher in the third cockpit.
Ah, right. That was not in the old newspapers, so that's interesting.
You could call it an early multi-role aircraft from
Yeah.
what you said, Dave.
Yeah, 100%.
I'd hazard to say that third cockpit was probably where the auxiliary tank went as well. Everything
Yes.
there.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Yes. Just a note too that although it had three cockpits, only two could be occupied at any time, like first and second or first and third.
Yeah, no, that's something that I was going to bring up because I had always thought three cockpits, three people could go in it, just like the Vildebeest or the Baffin. But it was just only this week that I've realised that. And one thing I read was that if you were in the second cockpit, there was access to the third cockpit. You could move backwards and forwards. Is that correct?
Yes, you could. Well, possibly it would have been difficult.
Right.
When I flew at solo, I actually preferred to fly it from the second.
Show today could do that.
Say again?
You'd have to be a little bit more sprightly than most of the people I'm looking at on the screen.
Yeah.
To do that, you'd have had to take out that second seat and have the little sliding seat would have to slide back between the two of them.
Yep. Okay. There's actually quite a few Avro 626s built, but not many of them had that third cockpit. I think New Zealand was one of the very few countries that got Avro to put that in, and most of them, including the RAF, only had the two cockpits. So that's quite interesting. I mean,
the Egyptians had about 36 of them, and we were supposed to actually get 8 altogether, but the second 4 that we were supposed to get were given to the Egyptians when they crashed 4 on their delivery flights.
Oh,
we missed out on the second 4.
Now that's really interesting, and a lot of this is something I've just found last night looking at old newspaper articles. A lot of the articles sort of suggest that all 4 arrived on what was it, the 25th of September 1935 in the Middlesex, SS Middlesex cargo ship. But then some of the articles suggest only 2 of them arrived. And then I found in 16th of August 1937, there's articles right across the country, it's obviously the same article syndicated, saying that 2 more had arrived on the SS Mamari at Littleton. And it said that they'd be joining the several already at Wigram. And I was like, what? So that would make 6. But that doesn't make any sense. Did you guys ever hear anything about? I mean, that's got to be a mistake, surely.
Definitely. I can only think ever of 4.
Yeah, that seems to be the consensus.
Media accuracy as usual.
Yeah, exactly.
Fake news.
Yeah, that's the one. So the NZ201 made its first flight on the 4th of October 1935 in New Zealand, first New Zealand flight. And then the other 3 were not actually assembled until early 1936, but I don't have dates on those, which gives that little bit of question mark over the 2 that supposedly arrived in 37. But they joined a flight of the flying training school at Wigram. And as I said before, they replaced the Bristol Fighters, although the Bristol Fighters actually stuck around and kept on flying for a while, but this was really took over most of their flying. And they, as well as training regular aircrew, they were also training the Territorial Air Force for a while until 1937-38. The Territorial Air Force started getting their own aircraft, which was the Baffins and then Vincent's. But in those late 1930s, the Avro started to do quite a few air shows and air pageants and various appearances around the country. One famously was doing a display at Mount Cook and was so low that it actually hit a bus and took its wheel off and had to fly back to Wigram and land with only one wheel, but wasn't too terribly damaged, so that's quite good.
It was 203. That was our one.
Oh, was it? Okay, right. Interesting.
But the tailplane was never perfectly straight after that. Because there was a slight gap on one side and no gap on the other.
Oh,
Right. Interesting. And yeah, as I said, the Territorial Air Force Squadron got their Baffins in 1938, but in 1939, the first ever wireless operator air gunner course was held, and that was for the Territorial wireless operator air gunners, and they used the Avros for that course. And I guess that in the early part of the war, they were being used to train pilots. They were used to train gunners, and all of the different veterans that I've come across and interviewed over the years, I only ever met one who had actually flown in one. And unfortunately, he didn't have much to say about it because he couldn't really remember. He thought it was a good plane, but I think he only did a couple of flights in an Avro.
They certainly did use them for training, Dave.
Yep.
In fact, one of the senior officers I knew relatively well, Air Commodore Stan Quill, did his first solo in an Avro. I
right.
think in our Avro.
Okay.
So obviously they were used for pilot training, and that was an interesting point because Stan was an interesting fellow.
Yes. Yeah. So 01, 02, and 04 were all written off the books and reduced to spares during the war. The first two, 01 and 02, they were written off on 11th of April 1942, and then 04 was written off on 11th of May 43. And also in 1943, June 43, 03, which had been up until that point the station runabout at Wigram, a bit of a hack, that was withdrawn from use in June 43, and it went to Hastings and joined the Air Training Corps as an instructional airframe, INST 90. And so the Air Training Corps had that to play with, I guess, use as a training aid for a few years. And then in May 1947, they sold it to Jim Frogley of Havelock North. And
Dave, if I could just have a little correction there.
Sure.
A little bit of interesting information came to light. One of my other hobbies is getting old engines running. I've got a Rolls-Royce Viper that I run, but I've also got a Cheetah 10,
okay,
which is the big brother of the 5.
Yep.
And I actually got it from the Frogley farm in 2020.
Okay.
And while I was at the Frogley farm, looking through all of Jim Jr.'s old documents, I came across the sales issue of the Avro 626 INST 90.
Yeah.
And it was actually sold to a squadron leader, Neville Cohen, in 1945. And it was one Avro 626, one Cheetah 5, and 14 spark plugs.
Okay.
Now, yeah, which was a bit ironic, and the sale price was the pricely sum of £10.
Wow.
Now, I rang Jim Frogley earlier this week because I'd never clocked the name on the invoice, and it turns out that Squadron Leader Cohen was Jim Frogley's uncle. So the aircraft actually was sold to Squadron Leader Cohen. He paid for it on the 3rd of December 1945. And so the story goes that Jim told me, the Air Force wouldn't allow him to take it until such time as it was put on the civil register. But apparently Jim and Neville, over a few beers in the officers' mess, decided to liberate the 626 and fly it home to the Frogley farm, which they did, and apparently nothing more was ever said. But yeah, a little bit interesting little bit of history that that sale in 47 to Jim Frogley actually didn't occur. It was sold in 45 to his uncle. And
that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I've got a copy of the sales invoice with all the details and information on it. It's just a little factoid.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you, Red. So did it actually change hands to Jim at a later stage, or
no? I think Jim probably paid for it. I didn't clarify that with Jim Jr., but
yeah,
I think Jim used Uncle Neville to buy the aircraft, because apparently Uncle Neville was a bit like some of us on the screen here as seagulls, and would show up back at the Frogley farm with various components and parts and spars and props. And so, yeah, a lot of the spare parts actually were appropriated from various places as they became a pain in the ass to store. So,
right. Oh, that's brilliant. That's a great piece of history. Thank you. So at some point it was obviously put back into the air, as you say, and it wasn't flown that frequently, I believe. But according to what I read in one of the old newspapers, Jim Frogley flew it in the Southland Centennial Air Race in January 1956. And then it was flown down to Wigram in October 57, where it was filmed for the National Film Unit film called The Eventful Years, which was released the following year for the 21st anniversary of the RNZAF, and you can actually see that film online. I'll probably link it into this show page. And according to what's on the NZDF serials, it was dismantled in 1958 and put into storage, and the registration was cancelled on the 23rd of August 1965. But then in 1977, 29th of March 77, Jim Frogley restored it to the Civil Register. So he obviously had intentions of getting it flying again, but I don't think it did fly again before it was sold to the RNZF Museum in October 1980. And when the museum ended up acquiring it, I don't know how much they paid for it, but
$20,000, I recall.
How much, sir?
$20,000.
Oh, right. Okay. Yep.
So it was a good profit for Jim.
Yeah, definitely. So it ended up going to a Hawker. Now, were any of you guys involved in the recovery of it to a Hawker?
I wasn't involved in the recovery. I was supposed to go. Trevor Jalley, Flight Lieutenant Trevor Jalley, who was the one of the engineering officers in AMS at the time, got tasked with shoulder tapping a bunch of blokes to go over and pick it up. I was supposed to go, but I'd been pre-booked to do a Viper instructional course with 14 Squadron. So unfortunately, I never got to go. But Trevor organised 4 or 5 guys from AMS, and they took a couple of flat deck trucks over to Jim's, loaded it all on, brought it back, popped it in the corner of AMS.
Okay, yep. And I believe it was Jim Fordyce that was assigned to run the restoration. Is that correct?
It was Jim. Yeah, Jim Fordyce. Yep. Jim was. He was appointed to chief leader of the team. Jim, apart from being quite a skilled technical warrant officer, was also a home builder. He had built several light aircraft, Taylor craft, and he was also very much into maintaining gliders. So he had a lot of skills in that sort of rebuilding area. So yeah, Jim was brought on board, and
Okay.
then through an interesting event, he came and shoulder tapped me to join the team, largely because I built model aircraft.
Right.
And I'd actually done a bit of a model aircraft display for a group of people Jim was very involved with that happened to be at the beach down at Himatangi and may or may not have worn clothes as the weather dictated. And
I remember that little group, Red.
yeah, do you remember that? Yeah. Oh, Jim, and beware of the bears when you drove up his driveway. And I actually was building about a 6-scale Hawker Tomtit at the time, which was very very similar in construction, except in wood rather than metal to the Avro. So Jim, I think, recognised those skills might be useful, and that's how I ended up on the team, or at the start of the team.
Okay. Now, one thing I'd like to know is, like at that time in the early 1980s, mid 1980s, the Air Force Museum was collecting aircraft because they were planning to open as a proper museum. And there were various aircraft being restored by units around the Air Force for the museum. But how did it come to the point where this particular aircraft was decided to get flying rather than just be static? Does anybody know that?
Yeah, so, well, I was, the time I was back at Ohaki, 82 to 86, I was the liaison officer for the museum. I sort of volunteered for the job because I was always interested in historical things and had an interest in the Avro.
Yep.
So I think the idea was, yes, there would be a museum. It was hugely sort of controversial. There's a big argument: would the museum be at Ohaki or would it be at Wigram? And the argument ran that Wigram was the home base, the spiritual heart and soul of the RNZAF, so it had to be at Wigram, and a lot of the old stalwarts were arguing that. Many were arguing that it should be at Ohaki because there was a little museum there. Some of you might remember Pete Strugnell, who started up that little one, and Peter's position at the museum was held against an auxiliary cook in the airman's mess. So anyway, it was argued that should be developed into a full-scale museum because 20,000 cars a day passed Ohaki, whereas not many cars passed Wigram. So that raged for a while, and eventually the traditionalists won, and the museum was to be at Wigram. And of course, everybody expected that Wigram would always be an RNZAF base.
Right.
And the plan was that it would be completed by 1987, which was the 50th anniversary of the formation of the Permanent Air Force, not the RNZAF. Oh no, it was the RNZAF.
Yeah, it was the anniversary of the RNZF becoming a separate force from the Army.
Royal Service, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I don't recall other aircraft being built, except, of course, the Tiger. A Tiger was acquired, bits of a Tiger, and that was going to be restored at Wigram. Many of you will remember that, under the Moth Doctors, which the chief Moth Doctor was Johnny Checketts.
Yeah. Yes. Some of the exhibits in the museum, such as the Spitfire, was restored at Woodburn, I believe, and they also took molds off it at the time. And they were very, and the Mustang was done, I think, at Woodburn. But various aircraft were getting tarted up for the museum, and I just find it interesting that they decided with the Avro. Was that because it was the oldest of the possible RNZAF aircraft to get, or?
Yes, I think so. And at the time, it was the only existing aircraft from the pre-war Air Force intact.
Right.
And so that had significance. And it was a restorable project. So, some are, some aren't, or one that could be done.
Yeah.
And it was meant to be the sort of the prestige aircraft at the opening of the museum, and there were vague murmurings even at that stage of a historic flight, which might be a 626, a Tiger, and a Harvard.
Yeah. Okay. Right. That makes sense. When it comes to the restoration, were there drawings available for it?
No.
I don't. Sorry, Chips. Do you want to have a say there?
That's all right, carry on.
All I remember was we had a printed manual that had a couple of 3 views and a bit of a matter of fact, I've still got a copy of it that gave you sort of enough information to get yourself into trouble, but not a lot to get you out. And it was, yeah. So there was no blueprints that I ever recall seeing, or that came with the aircraft from Jim.
Well, that's quite interesting when you think about in the early 1980s, there was no restoration industry in this country as such. The only restorations that had taken place of ex-Air Force aircraft would have been the Mustang back in the 1960s, CCG, and a couple of Harvards up to that point, I guess, that had come out of service and were pretty good anyway. They just had to have their engines put back on, and that's a hell of a challenge to take on something that's unique and has no actual factory drawings. So
I think I found a bit of paperwork I've kept with my photos, and it was a CPA, which is a confidential performance appraisal that Jim did on me at during the Avro process or project. And the first sentence of it probably sums the whole project up for all of us that were involved. And it said, this airman is employed on a task outside the normal scope and technical skills of the RNZAF trained technicians.
Right.
And I think that one sentence really sums up where we all came from. You know, we were all used to grabbing a part off a shelf, bolting it on, unbolting it. I was lucky I came from Woodburn. I'd been working on overhauls of the Viper and J52s, so I had a little bit of expertise in that area. But I think you'd all agree, Mac and Chips and what have you, you know, this is work like hadn't been done in the Air Force for decades, probably back to the war when they had to rebuild aircraft to keep them serviceable. So that kind of set the tone, I think, Dave, that, you know, the skill sets that we developed and learned were all pretty new.
Right. So in those early stages, Red, when it turned up at a Hawker and you were brought into the team, was it all there? Was there a complete aircraft?
Yeah, there was. There was a lot of spare parts, a lot of spare props, lots of wing ribs, all sorts of stuff. But because it had sat in a barn for, I don't know, 2 or 3 decades, it had all the covering had been removed, and so the aircraft was just bare framed, and it had animals, dogs living in it, and fortunately it was undercover, but it kind of wasn't out of the weather, and so there was a level of corrosion present, and that was the first thing that we had to identify was, especially with the spars, they were of concern right at the very start because they were quite a intricate shaped piece of steel, top and bottom spars with a shear web between them, and reproducing them would have been difficult. I'm not quite sure what happened further down the track, but I know with my involvement, the first thing we did was disassemble the wings and started beating or blasting the spars back to get all the corrosion off them and just see how deep it had gone.
Yeah.
But the aircraft was complete, and if anything, there were more parts there than was needed.
Okay.
So yeah, it was complete. Memory.
There was plenty of spare struts that we got with it, so it looked like there was almost like 3 aeroplane bits anyway.
I think it was fair to say that the spare parts, as usual, and when you get a lot of spare parts, were all the bits that never ever break or never ever wear out.
Right.
But the items that we required, which as Red had said, were spars and spar webs and things like that. That we had no spares of those. So yeah, the steel struts and things we seem to have 4 aeroplanes worth of them, I think.
Okay. Interesting. What about the engine? Was it the original engine was still with it?
I believe so. When it was sold, it had a Cheetah 5, and when it, I actually, one of my last jobs before I had my accident was I started removing the engine from the airframe. So we're pretty sure that engine is the same engine that came with the aircraft. Unfortunately, they never put the serial number of the Cheetah 5 on the invoice.
Right.
So we'll never know. But yeah, it's highly likely it was the original engine.
I guess there weren't that many of them around either, of the Mark 5.
Yeah, it was a one-off engine.
Yeah. At that stage, you mentioned that you were just disassembling it when you had your accident. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you actually exited the team, Red?
Yeah, well, we started stripping the wings down. Jim was teaching us new skills, forming a lot of the little wing riblets that went between the ribs had been not destroyed, but they were not in good shape. And Jim was teaching us how to form ribs, make new ribs using, we started off with rubber sheets and hydraulic presses and that sort of stuff. Pulling the spars down. We were kind of the poor cousin in the hangar. When we first moved in, everyone thought we were not a joke, but we were not really the sharp end, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Here we are in a strike wing, restoring a 1930s biplane. And whilst I don't think we were a joke in the hangar, we were sort of taken fairly lightheartedly.
Yeah.
So in those early months, just establishing ourselves as a credible facility took a bit of doing. And as I say, I left the team sadly 5 or 6 months into the project. I had an off-duty diving accident. I used to like trout fishing, and I had a dive into a river, cooling off one evening way up in the Kaweka Ranges, and unfortunately I broke my neck, and that terminated my service career. So otherwise I hoped I would have still been there at the end with Chips. So because I loved it. For me, it was the epitome of what an aircraft tradesman, really is. Paul would have had that satisfaction with Pioneer, taking wrecks and turning them back into beautiful flying aircraft for John to go on and fly. So, it was a process that, as a tradesman, I was really proud to be involved with. But sadly, that wasn't to be my course.
Right. And so, Chips, when did you come into the project?
When Red had his accident, Jim was recruiting another staff member, and my interest in all things old, I was into vintage cars and antiques at the time, attracted his attention, and I footed the bill. So I was employed on the team. That's my starting point.
Okay.
Picking up from where Red left off. I was fortunate to see it from a bag of bits to a flying machine and have a flight in it. So it was really awesome.
Excellent. And you came onto the team around about the same time, didn't you, Paul?
Yeah, I actually arrived in I'm going to say sort of September '81. I was on 75 at the time and thinking about maybe doing something else other than sort of spend all my time on exercise around the place. And Red came over one day and sort of said, did I have any interest in working on the Avro? And I thought, yeah, that sounds different. And it certainly was. So at the same time that I joined, so Red and Jim were there, and the day I joined, Peter Lowen joined as well. So Peter and I had done mech and tech course together, so we knew each other pretty well. And we thought, you know, there would be some sort of romantic journey for us, and I suppose it turned out a bit like that as well.
Right. Okay.
Certainly, as Red alluded to, spent a lot of time bead blasting.
Right.
That was in that giant plastic sausage they had going in the hangar there.
Yeah, yeah, we didn't have a bead blast cabinet big enough to do spar bits and spar caps and spar webs, so we made our own. And again, that didn't help our standing amongst fellow hangar people, that these guys in sperm suits, as they called them, would disappear into a plastic tube for hours on end and bead blast. So that was the focal point of a bit of hilarity in the hangar.
Brilliant.
Eccentric's the right word, perhaps, chaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to say, I'm not eccentric, but I know a lot of people that are.
So what are your strongest memories, Chips and Paul, of that stage of the restoration? What were the biggest challenges? And
Well, the thing that sticks with me is the sheer Britishness of it. You know, as usual with English stuff, the complication engineers in the factory must have been the busiest people around. You know, came up with how you should build a wing, for instance, and then the complication engineers got involved, and it just blew it out of proportion. I was just completely gobsmacked at how the spars were, you know, a steel piece with another steel piece over the top, and then a steel piece stuck in the middle, and all riveted together with a million rivets, and it was just, you know, unbelievably complicated.
Right.
You know, strong as hell, but there was certainly, when they built these things, it looked like there was absolutely no consideration given to future maintenance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like they were made to, as you know, made to get made and fly, and then if they needed maintenance, you know, to the extent we did, you threw it away and got another one.
Right.
I don't imagine that, you know, Avro ever thought that people would be silly enough to pull those spars apart, because even just getting them apart was a monstrous sort of issue. You know, it was pretty hard stuff to work on, some of it.
Yeah,
Okay.
making them was as much fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. For me, and I think Paul would support it, was reverse engineering everything, finding out how they made it, and then having to replicate it, and the weird ways that we achieved those results. And we had a massive support from the machine shop at the time, making dies and things like that, helping us out. A young Gary Vincent, he was very clever at his machining skills, which helped us through a bit as well.
Yep.
Making simple things like punches for the Whitney Wad punch, when we were lining up the myriad thousands of holes on the spar, top and bottom ribs, making the dies to form that web, and that was fun as well. Off to a place in Palmy where they built Mack trucks to press the webs out. Yeah, we had a lot of fun, and unique things like drawing box section tube from round section tube using a tug in the hanger and trying to pull the side of the hanger off. Yeah, there's a few memorable antics that we went through to achieve the end result. And with the guidance of Jim and his skills, teaching a bunch of novice how to make things, which has stuck with me for the rest of my life, and I still use those skills today. Yeah, kudos to Jim for what he passed on to us.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So, I should have asked this earlier on, but were you guys all aircraft technicians that were working on it, or were there other trades involved in the team?
The team itself was comprised of aircraft technicians, but
Yeah.
you know, as Chips has said, we had really good support from the machine shop, the metal shop on base, and the chippy shop. There was a fair bit of wood involved in it.
Yeah.
So and also a lot of support from Woodburn. Peter Lowen and I spent a lot of time flying to Woodburn for weeks at a time to use the gear down there, because they obviously had better stuff than we had at Hawker. And so the support seemed, if we needed it and were prepared to fight for it, we got it. But there was a lot of fighting for a lot of the stuff. But
Right.
good support from the rest of the base. I think everyone was in tune with what we were doing, or amused with what we were doing, one or the other. I'm not sure which one.
Yeah. And I guess all the instruments had to be overhauled by the avionics section, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that sort of thing went on in the background. Like I said, there was a massive support behind us.
Yeah.
Even though there was a team of 4 to 5 driving the main restoration, we couldn't have done it without the support of others, right down to people like Fergie in the background doing the wiring, the electroplating bay, plating everything for us and anodizing as we went on. One of the things that sticks in my memory was how easy it was to source the basic BA hardware and the taper pins, which was still at the time all in stock at Te Rapa. Well, not all, but the majority of them.
Okay.
And drawing that out, it was left over from the days of Sunderland's and things like that, I believe. But yeah.
Right.
Yeah, actually, that was one of the first jobs that when I came on the team, Jim said, right, we're going for a trip to Te Rapa for a bit of a raid. And we ended up getting unparalleled access to the storage areas, looking for everything English, BA, BSF. And we came back with, it was amazing what was sitting at Te Rapa in the stores that had been there for decades, just languishing in boxes. So yeah, we got a lot of British hardware out of Te Rapa.
Interesting. You're talking about the big team effort around the base that was involved, and I was thinking, isn't that interesting that at the same time you guys were doing all this and putting together a 1930s aircraft, at the same time there was another team at Hawker that were completely redesigning the Skyhawk and bringing it up to the most modern thing that we've ever had at that time with the Kahu team. And this is interesting things, like Kahu gets all the press really, and you guys were doing just as innovative and interesting work on that Avro, I reckon.
Well, we'd like to think that we were a cut above the Kahu team, Dave.
So with the third cockpit with the scarf ring and the gun and all that would have been in the back, was that all genuine stuff? And I mean, had that been removed when it was a civilian aircraft? And did you have a genuine weapon in the back there or anything like that, or was it fake, or how did that go?
We never had a scarf ring. We just had a tin lid on, basically.
Yeah.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah.
We did have a scarf ring for it in the end. I don't know where it came from, but it did show up. Yeah. What happened to it later, I don't know either.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't even thought about that, but now as it sits in the museum, it's still got the tin lid on it. no rings. So
Yeah, so somewhere during the process, the scarf ring did turn up and then disappeared into the ethos again. So, yeah, I don't know.
okay.
We wanted to fit the bomb racks, but they said we weren't allowed. So,
Oh, really?
We never fitted the brackets to the spars. We would have loved to have bomb racks on it.
Okay. So tell me about your time on the team. When did you come into it, Tui?
Well, I think after 1981, I was one of the last ones on the team.
Yep.
I worked in ERS for 6.5 years, and then I got shifted to Wigram, and I went straight into the skin bay. So
Okay.
I did time for a couple of years in the skin bay, and then I was on the line there, and then they said they were looking for more people, so I stuck my name down, and I have no idea why they picked me, because I don't think I had any, apart from some skin bay experience.
It was eccentricity, sure.
I fitted right in there.
So we're all eccentric.
I think it's attention to detail, because everybody had to have an attention to detail, and just keeping at it until you got the damn thing right. We were making stuff from nothing half the time.
Yeah.
I think with hand skills, being able to beat a piece of aluminium around a wooden block to make the bearing covers for the ailerons and the elevators, it was a lot of hand labor went into that stuff.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Well, people ask me, what did you do? And I show them 4 or 5 of these little covers, and I said, I spent a whole week building 4 of those. And I said, have a look in the bin. There's about 7 failures. Halfway through.
So, tell me about the engine. Who overhauled the engine, and was that done in New Zealand or was it done overseas, or how did that go?
I think that was done in ERS.
Was by Sam Micklejohn, I think, was quite involved with that, and it was done in ERS.
Okay. They had a squadron leader at the time who dug out his whole training notes because he apparently trained on them, and they were relying on old training notes initially until they managed to get some books over from the UK.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so I guess that would have been run down there before it came up to be fitted at a Hawker.
Yeah, I believe it was.
Yeah, that's the story about the run-up truck. And how they managed to get it back again, and they were doing it on the run-up truck. Okay. That dated back to World War II.
Yeah, right. Okay. And so in 1985, it was completed, and some of you guys had left the team by then, but they brought you all back for the first flight, didn't they?
Well, look, we got an invite. My recollection is we sort of had to get ourselves back there, but we were welcome. But get yourself here, which some of us did. Some of us were able to achieve that, and unfortunately some others weren't. But yeah, it was quite a monumentous occasion, really. The first flight. I'd been off the team at that stage for about 2 years, 2 and a bit years, and to see it fly was something pretty special.
Awesome. And that's where you come in, John. Tell us about the preparation for that first flight.
Yes, well, I mean, I was lucky. I'd always had an interest in old airplanes, and since really I suppose flying Harvards, I was always interested in vintage airplanes, although they weren't vintage at the time. So I was a bit lucky that I just happened to coincide with the Avro and was posted to a Hawker in 81, and pretty much at the beginning or 82, sorry, pretty much at the beginning of the project. So of course I used to pop in and get in the way of the guys and ask questions, and so I was watching the project evolve, which was very useful because I knew quite a lot about the aircraft as it was being built, and we would take VIPs down there. On one occasion we even took Chuck Yeager to see it.
Oh, right.
He visited a Hawker, first time I ever met the prick, and one of the rudest men I've ever met in my life, no graciousness whatsoever, and took him down to see it, and he sort of walked around it and grunted and was clearly not interested. But anyway, so I knew quite a lot about the aircraft by the time it was ready to fly, and because of my Harvard time, and I'd been flying Tigers and other vintage aircraft since the mid-70s. So I felt that I was reasonably qualified to fly the aircraft, and
Yeah.
it was pretty basic in the sense of how aircraft flew at the time. It was interesting. I think you said earlier it had hydraulic brakes. It didn't actually. It had what they called differential brakes, which
Ah,
was a British system common to a lot of aircraft at the time, where it was all done by magic and by cables. And so if your rudder pedals were neutral, there was a certain amount of slack in the cable. And then you had a handbrake on the left-hand side of the cockpit that you could pull on. And if you pulled it hard on with the pedals neutral, it was effectively the parking brake, and it would
yep.
lock on a ratchet. But when you were taxiing, as you moved the rudder pedals, it would take up some of the slack. If you pushed right rudder, it would take up the slack on the right cable. And then if you gently eased on the hand brake, it would apply a little bit of differential braking to that wheel. And that was common to a lot of aircraft like the Domini, the Chipmunk, the Proctor, and those sorts of aircraft. The starting technique, using an impulse mag, that we pretty much lost that skill, although we've got it back now at the Vintage Aviator, for example. We know how they work. But generally, it was the guys who would swing the prop. And we never really mastered the impulse mag technique of setting the prop on a compression and then cranking the impulse mag, which sent a shower of sparks to the cylinder on compression, and boom, away would go the engine. I remember Frogley telling us on one occasion, oh, it was easy to start. The wife used to start it for me when I was having me breakfast. I think a bit of a Frogley story. So, sorry, long story short, I felt quite comfortable with the aircraft by the time it was ready to fly, and I'd sat in it, thought about it, and I'd actually done a little project to write pilot's notes for it. I quite enjoyed that. It was the first time I'd ever written pilot's notes. It's normally a company that writes them, but I used the standard British model of, an electrical section, a hydraulic section, a blah blah, and then a handling section and emergencies. And so by the time the aircraft flew, I think I'd written that. And yeah, long story short, I felt quite comfortable attempting a first flight.
Okay. Tell me about the cockpit layout. Was it fairly basic? Was it much like a tiger moth sort of thing? Or?
Well, no, it was reasonably for the time. It was quite luxurious.
Yeah.
The two cockpits were very similar. The front cockpit, the big difference was it had a spade grip device and of course a gun button on it. So for forward firing guns, that's how the pilot operated it. The stick in the back was a Harvard type of stick, or actually just a big wooden pole.
Yeah.
The second cockpit was less well equipped than the front, but because of, I guess, my time flying other aircraft and time in the back seat of the Harvard, I actually preferred flying the 626 from the back.
Okay.
And it could be flown from either cockpit. There was no significant difference. And the mags you could operate or had to have both sets on as like a Tiger Moth. I liked the second cockpit, I should call it, because the visibility was better. You came out from under the wing.
Yeah.
If you're in the front cockpit, the top wing sat very much over your head, and it was mildly claustrophobic in terms of visibility. And so I preferred flying the aircraft from the back. So the first flight, I was in the second cockpit, and Air Vice Marshal Dave Crooks, you'll remember, CAS,
Yep.
he came along and he sat in the front.
Okay. Right. So once it was flying, did you actually do any aerobatics with it or anything like that, or did you treat it like a TiVo aircraft, vintage
I was
aviation?
hoping you wouldn't ask that difficult question, Dave. We're not off the record, of course, because this will eventually be posted, but in their infinite wisdom, their lordships had decided it was far too valuable to be aerobated or spun.
Right.
So aerobatics were prohibited.
Okay.
but I did from time to time explore the envelope, you might put it, a little bit, unusual attitudes. And it was an Avro. So as you'd expect from an Avro, it was highly aerobatic.
Right. Okay.
But we weren't permitted to do aerobatic.
Excellent. Okay. And so once you'd flown it, obviously from a Hawker, you did a bit of a tour of the country, didn't you, I think?
Yes, that was interesting. We did quite a bit of the flying and obviously proved it. And I think I'd diddled up a bit of a test flight schedule based on the Harvard schedule. And although we did most of that on the first or second flight, I think. And so then gave it to the team, and there was nothing to fix. It was perfect. The airplane flew perfectly.
Right.
In fact, everything was in perfect condition. And I remember there was the only mild criticism I ever heard of Jim and his perfectionism was that the aircraft was perhaps over restored, and that it was done so beautifully and so well. I think on one occasion he told me he'd made 4 fuel tanks because the first 3 didn't meet his high standards. So really the aircraft was absolutely perfect. It was beautifully restored. That's the only word for it. You could say for a service aeroplane, over restored. But anyway, be that as it may, it was absolutely stunning. Inside, the cockpit was beautifully finished. The aircraft flew perfectly. I don't recall that there were any trim adjustments or anything like that. It was a superb restoration.
Okay.
Sorry, you'd asked the question. Yes, the tour came a little bit later. It was decided that before it went to Wigram, it would do a tour of the bases, and we went to Hamilton, Te Rapa, and then on to Whenuapai, and flew a number of VIPs there. I remember the base commander, Robin Klitcher, had a flight in the front cockpit. And I always took one of you chaps, you'd remember, I remember several times with Seward in the front. And any of the others, Buck, did you?
Yeah, I came back from Whenuapai to Hawker with you.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
That's when the crankshaft met its demise.
No, that wasn't from the Whenuapai flight.
The
Yeah, it was
crankshaft episode was from Napier Hastings.
Yes, it was, Seward.
When we went and did the formation flight with a monospar.
Yeah. So I was sort of coming to that. So yeah, we took it around. One of the interesting flights before that happened was took it to Wellington, and again, I think Seward might have been in the front.
Yeah, I was on the way back.
Yeah, and we flew the Minister of Defence.
Oh, yeah.
One Franco Flynn, who was an RNZAF wartime navigator, and we flew him out of Rongotai and local flight, and then came back. And then I remember we took off from Wellington and were climbing out on track for a Hawker, and after about 2 or 3 minutes, the controller came up, and I forget what the call sign was we used, might have been Avro 626 or something, and he said, "Do you think you could move a little bit to the left, maybe a mile or so, because we're trying to get a 737 airborne, and you guys haven't gone very far."
When we cleared the hills and lined up with the motorway, the cars were overtaking us.
So yes, that was really fun. I enjoyed those flights, of course, because I love flying old airplanes, and I think all up, I've got about 50 hours in my logbook, Avro 626, which was wonderful, really. But that was the sort of the total tally. So anyway, then it was finally decided we'd take it to Napier Hastings to show Jim Frogley, and so we went to Napier, as Seward mentioned. Jim, who was a bit of a grumpy old bugger by that stage, he declined to come to Napier from where he lived. So we flew with the monospar, Piet van Asch's famous monospar, and that was interesting because on that occasion they were the oldest airworthy aircraft in New Zealand, the 2 oldest aircraft.
Right.
And I have a feeling that the monospar preceded the Avro. It was the oldest, and the 626 was the second oldest. Right. So we naturally had to fly them together, and I've got a lovely photo that, what were they called, aerial mapping, blew up of the 2 aircraft, and sent me one, and I guess sent one to the RNZAF of the two oldest aircraft in New Zealand flying at the time. And then it was on the way back, and as I recall it, Stuart might remember better, but I had noticed a couple of times on those earlier flights a slight vibration, very, very slight. I remember I'd first noticed it at Whenuapai, I think, and Robin Klitcher was in the front seat. And I said, can you feel a little vibration? And he said, as far as I'm concerned, the whole bloody thing's vibrating. But I had this niggly thing that I could feel something. And I think on the way back from Hastings, because we diverted over Hastings and we flew over the top of Jim's place, and the old bugger did us the favour of coming out and waving to us from the ground.
Yeah.
And then we came back to Hawker. And I'm sure I said to you, Stuart, can you feel a vibration? And you said, oh, I don't know, maybe. And then we landed, and you'd probably tell the story better, what you found.
Yes, because the prop kept coming loose because they didn't actually have the correct cones on there. Because it was supposed to have two split cones, and they had one solid and one split. So it was never really tight, because at Whenuapai, they actually flew with a Skyhawk some more tab washers up when they tightened it up there.
Oh, right.
And when we came back, and then we took it off, and then as soon as I looked at it, and I said, this ain't going anywhere now, because you can see the crack, because they were prone to cracking, because there was a specific NDT process for just inspecting it. So it was a known problem.
Right.
Yes, and in fact, that was interesting, because there were no other Cheetah 5s around. And when that happened and we started searching, it was interesting. It began to become apparent that Cheetah 5s cracked crankshafts, and that's why there were no surviving Cheetah 5s, because they'd all been scrapped or done away with. Right. And so we had the massive problem then of there were no spare crankshafts to be had. This is getting on with the story a little bit further, perhaps, but yes, Cheetah 5s had a tendency to crack them. So that, of course, then we grounded the aircraft, and that sort of gets us on to, I suppose, the next saga. That was 85 or 86. Can you remember? I could look in the log, but maybe 86. 82, 83, 84. Oh, it must have been 85, because then I was posted at the end of 85, and the aeroplane was grounded at Ohakea. And the grand plan of flying it for the opening of the museum in 87 looked completely fraught, because there were no Cheetah 5s, there were no spare crankshafts. So am I telling a story that you chaps would tell better about the search then for the new crankshaft? Because the aircraft was grounded for quite a long time. Any comment? Or can you? Well, I could carry on.
Well, the crankshaft actually was sent back to Rolls-Royce.
It was.
We welded a new end on it.
Yes, well, as I recall it, I was then posted to air staff, and there was a question of whether the Avro would ever be maybe trucked to Wigram to be a static exhibit. That was the best hope.
Yep.
And then the crankshaft was sent to Rolls-Royce, and they scanned it and looked at it, and then said that perhaps they could electron beam weld it. Which was some technique that may have been new at that time, and you chaps would know better. So cutting a long story short, again, they did weld the thing, but because of the uncertainty of it, they lifed it at 5 hours or 10 hours.
Well, they gave us 20 hours in the end.
Oh, was it? Okay. Well, I think that might have been an extension, because I recall there was a limiting figure of something like 5 or 10.
Yeah.
But anyway, then the air staff was fretting, what would they do with it? Would it be taken to bits and trucked to Wigram for the great event, or would it be flown? And this must have been then late 86, or it might have been early 87. I could look in my log, but I should have done so. But I got the call when I was in the air staff that the aircraft had been fixed, the crankshaft had been fitted. It could be test flown, and subject to a test flight, it could be maybe flown to Wigram.
Yep.
And I remember, as I mentioned in the article, I happened to bump into the CAS about a week before I was to go to Hawker and test fly it. And you'd all remember Pat Neville.
Mm.
And he was my squadron commander on Canberra's, and I'd always, highly respected him and liked him, and he was perhaps a bit of a mentor of mine. But anyway, he was CAS. So I remember saying, morning, sir, and all that. And he said, "You taking this 626 to Wigram next week?" "Yes, sir." "You've got an escort?" "Yes, we'll arrange a 3-squadron Huey." "And right, okay, what height are you going to take it across?" "And fairly high, 8 or 10 or something." And he said, "Right, okay, well, if you ditch it and cook straight, stay with it."
Yeah.
I thought, well, yeah, I think he was joking. But anyway, the great day came, and we did launch. I think you were in the front again, Stuart.
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah, and so that was really quite uneventful. We took off from Haki. I think we refueled at Woodburn.
Yeah, we stopped there. Yep.
Yep. And then on to Wigram and delivered safely for the great day, which came some months later for the opening of the museum. And again, I flew it in that. Bit of a display, short display. Buck was there; he was looking after it.
Yep.
And it achieved the purpose.
Yeah.
And then just very, very quickly, what would happen to it after that? I argued, of course, that it should fly with all the cost and expense and trouble that we'd gone to. And I did check out one pilot. Some of you might remember Wing Commander Porky Mackenzie.
Yep.
Noel Mackenzie. I think he was a squadron leader or flight lieutenant at CFS at the time. He was the designated pilot to be. And I think I did 2 or 3 flights with him, just checking him out on it. And I think he might have gone solo. And then the word came down, too valuable, far too valuable, put it in the shed and don't fly. And of course, it had reached its crankshaft limit by that stage of 5 or 10, or whether it had got some kind of extension, yes, to 20.
Okay.
What was there ever a crankshaft manufactured for it at Woodburn?
Yes. Yeah. Somebody?
Yeah, again, it came back to Gary Vincent. I believe there was a new forged crankshaft made, and Gary machined one up.
I remember.
Reinstalled into the engine, and that's as far as it got, I believe.
Yep.
When I came back to aviation in 2006-7, it was moved again by Historic Flight that they try and fly it because I was available, and I'm one of the few that were still associated with the Air Force that knew something about it. So they mooted the idea, and then that was when it became a permanent asset on the ground in the Air Force. It was around that time that they absolutely closed all the doors up on it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there was a sad day having to push that into the hangar at the museum. They told us that, it's still a unit established aircraft and belongs to Central Flying School, Historic Flight. But we were pretty sure that we used to go down and do servicings on it once a month, that sort of thing. But we were pretty sure it'd never come out again. I do remember pulling the engine out and sending it to Woodburn for the new crankshaft, and the museum came up and painted up a dummy one, which probably is still the one that's in there now, as you saw it. But as John said, I flew with Porky. He was a wing commander by then, John. The last flight of the Avro.
OC flying training, was he?
That's right, yeah. And that was the last flight that ever flew. So I was fortunate enough to fly in that, considering that I'd watched all these guys up here, including yourself, from start till I left for Wigram. When I got posted to Wigram in '83, I was on Team 1 AMS at Hawker on the Skyhawks, and I spent half the day over watching what the boys were up to restoring this aircraft. So I had an interest right from the start, and to actually fly in it and ground run it. I got a picture. I think you've seen it, John, with you and me standing talking to the Governor General, Sir Paul Reid, in front of the Avro 87 flyby. That was pretty awesome. You and was it Mike Panther and the Harvard and Glenn Edwards and the Tiger Moth, I think, flying past, sort of low wing down past the crowd. It was pretty awesome. The old Avro, I think, must have been at idle going past there.
I got to sign out Buck when he took over, and I said to sign you out, I said, if you can get that thing started, I'll sign you out.
Yeah.
I just left you go, and then you got it up and running, and so that's it. Yeah, you're signed out.
Well, Barry Dorr, who was staunch bloody sumpy that you guys all knew, stood at the side of the hangar watching two airframe fitters, Johnny Miller, who was in charge of the flight, he's RIP, sadly, and myself. He said, two framies will never get that bastard started, and it started first pop. We were determined.
In the end, we actually were blending our own petrol to make 80 octane because it didn't like the 100 octane because it was running too cold. That's why in the early days, we had to pull the plugs after every flight because they sorted up. And
It's interesting though, Stuart, because you could still get 8087 in those days before they discontinued it. And we flew all the Tigers on 8087, and that was discontinued, I think, about 1990 or something. They stopped making.
Yeah, because we flew the Tiger Moth on Britolite, which was at 8087.
Oh, no, 8087 was an aviation gasoline.
Oh,
but White Spirit, as you say, BP made Britolite, Mobil made, I think what they call it. Oh,
Britolite 73 octane, so we got Britolite
that's right,
to bring us up to 80 octane. And then after that, really easy.
Yeah, we
as a matter of interest, guys, like I never got to run it, but I run a Cheetah 10 now. What was your starting procedure for getting the engine started? I'm assuming you hand cranked it.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing because I did all the first engine runs on it, and there was a little bit of antics there as well. To get it started, initially we used the hand cranking port and used various starter motors off Morris Miners, Bedford trucks, whatever, to get it turning, and fed the 28 volts through these things to try and get it wound over. So we'd go through 2 or 3 starts on each starter motor, and Stuart and I forget who, it might have been Keith Braddock, were out there trying to tune it up as well. But yeah, we had a lot of fun in those early days just to get the thing started and up and running.
You had a half of AMS out there watching it.
Yeah, we had ambulances and all the critics in the world. When we were
doing the train one time with it because we overprimed it.
That's right, I remember. Yeah, lighting up all the fuel on the ground.
I had to go and repaint the undercarriage legs because he got a bit singed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So yeah.
So did you start it on the main mags, or did you use a booster coil?
No, it's got a hand crank. The hand crank mags.
On the hand crank.
Yeah.
I don't think that wasn't the way we were starting it finally, though, were we? Or was I?
We were still doing that. You had to have 2 people, one person priming, the other one winding, and one person cranking.
Yeah.
So it was just like a 3-man effort.
Yes, yeah, you had to crank. Yeah, strictly speaking, you didn't need the starter mag, but it worked.
Yeah, what the problem with the Cheetah was the mags are fixed timing at about 26 to 28 degrees advanced, and if you didn't start it on a good retarded spark, they had a bad habit of backfiring. So I've learned all of this with the Cheetah 10, and because I was very lucky when I got the engine off Jim Frogley, I not only got its logbooks, but I also got all the manuals for it, and it's quite the starting procedure in there is quite specific that you have to use the booster coil to start it. You should never start it on the main mags because of the backfire problem.
You could actually run it while they're just hand cranking on the booster coil on the hand crank mag because it was a retarded spark, and then once it was up and running, then you flicked on the main mags.
That's right. Yep.
Yep. Yeah.
No.
But,
You guys mentioned you mentioned the repainting the undercarriage legs at one stage. Was it S&S that Safety and Surface that painted the aircraft and did all the
yeah, it was
doping
a
and all
paint
that?
shop did everything there.
Yeah. Okay.
We refabricated the wings and did that ourselves, but yeah, S&S certainly painted it.
Okay. It must have been one of those lost skills that had to come back then, because there wouldn't have been many fabric. I suppose there's a bit of fabric on the Harvards and stuff at the time.
Yeah, Jim Fordyce came back to us to help us fabricate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he gave us a bit of training along that and nursed us through that process.
Right. So that's another of his home building skills, I guess, because there's a lot of fabric stuff in home builds.
And it was covered with the modern day Seconite fabric instead of the old Irish linen.
Okay.
So yeah, it had the Seconite process done.
One thing that I have noticed looking at photos of it from the 1980s is the only thing that you could pick up that was modern on it was the prop tips have the modern white, red, white stripes, rather than in the 1930s it would have been yellow on the prop tip. But I've only just picked that up just now, so this week.
Interesting, Dave. I remember Cliff Jenks. Do you remember Cliff Jenks?
Yep.
He was a dedicated historian and was editor for a long time of the Aviation Historical Society magazine. He was very critical of the paint scheme on the Avro and said that it wasn't right. And I mean, he was a perfectionist and very picky. It looked fine, it looked authentic to me, but he said it was not quite as it should have been as a perfectionist historian.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, well, that was a debate because of whether or not to paint it in A-flight colours or just leave it as 203. But they said that without the red swooshes on it, it would just look too boring. So they wanted something that at least stood out a little bit.
Yes.
So we painted the hubcaps red as well.
Yes.
Originally at Wigram, because it was A-flight, it was red, and B-flight was blue.
Yeah.
So we painted the spinner red, the hubcaps red, and it got the big swoosh on the side painted red as well.
Yeah, that idea dated from the First World War, where they distinguished between flights by doing things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very good. Well, is there any other bits of history that you can think of with this aircraft that you'd like to record?
When we flew down on the way south, we had to hold at 5,000 feet going through Wellington. And I was in the front cockpit, and that's the only sensitive altimeter that was in the front.
Yeah.
But because of the vibration, the needle was going like a windscreen wiper.
Oh.
So I had to grab it. I had to reach under the dash, grab the actual altimeter and dampen it out.
Okay.
What the exact height was. Otherwise, the windscreen wiper of the actual altimeter was just going like this the whole time with the vibration.
Yeah, non-sensitive ones. Yeah, they. Well, that was, I think, another reason why I liked flying it from the back. But it was we never really had it when, as somebody said earlier, we never had anybody in the third cockpit. It was always either flown solo. In fact, I don't even recall if I flew it that very often solo, because if it was ever going to fly, then we always took a passenger.
Right.
Certainly, I preferred flying it from the second cockpit. Just as a minor note, the people who flew it solo obviously were Noel Mackenzie and me. And then before it left Ohakea, Stu Boys was base commander, and he had done a couple of photo flights with me in it. A couple of nice photos that still are around from that photo flight. And he exercised his right of kingship, or the droit de seigneur, or whatever you call it. This base commander demanded that he be allowed to fly it solo. So I said, okay, off you go. And he flew a circuit or something like that on his own.
Oh, right. Okay.
Well, I can get over my one and only flight myself in it. I still remember we just went up Lansdowne Valley out of south of Wigram there. Was the room in the cockpit is something that sticks in my memory, and it was like sitting in a huge room and a big growling the engine was, I mean, I did many hours in backseat of the Harbour and that sort of thing, but it was just a one-off I've never experienced before and since, obviously. You have, John, but yeah, it was just, I sort of basically held my elbows up on the bloody sills and just sat back and enjoyed the flight. Porky McKenzie said that there were only gentle turns due to the gyroscopic action on the prop, the crankshaft, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a beautiful day and just cruising around, and that was one experience I'll never forget.
It was sort of like a big spongy tiger. It was very easy to fly. I mean, easier than a tiger. Tigers, cranky little things, which of course makes them such good trainers. The Avro was a lovely, well, it was an Avro, and it was sort of getting near the end of the run of Avro silver biplanes, and so it was lovely to fly. Big old airplane, sort of lolloped along, plenty of power, and really almost too easy to fly, and a relatively complicated aircraft. The RAF primary trainer from about 1930 to 33 or 4 was the tutor, which was a smaller 626, if you like, 2 cockpits. And they eventually decided it was too complicated an aircraft for a basic trainer and too expensive. So it was replaced by the Tiger, which was much more basic, as you guys know. And the Tiger then, of course, became the primary trainer of the late 30s and into World War II.
Right.
I went up with John one time. We were doing a stall test, and we wanted to find out exactly what speed it stalled. And we estimated about 47 miles an hour, but you couldn't actually tell it was a stall. It just sort of just started to squish a bit.
Yeah, just mushed.
Yeah, just mushed in. But on that flight, we were flying up and down the beach, and John said, "Here, you try it." So I was just doing aileron turns, and he said, "No, give it a bit of rudder." Well, I accidentally gave it full opposite rudder. The nose came up, it came around, and did nothing wild at all. And John said, "Hey, if that was a tiger moth, we would have been on our back spinning into the ground." But the nose just came up and it just came around and did nothing dramatic at all.
Yeah, it was a very easy airplane to fly. Remember, though, it had, I'll think for a minute, slats, not
leading
slots.
edge, Handley Page slots.
And slats, because the slats are movable. The slots were just slots in the wing. Were they not slats?
Yeah, they were slats, but the special word was Handley Page slots.
Right.
That's what he called them, because the Air Force had paid for the rights. They paid £2,000 for the right to fit them to all our aircraft.
Oh, okay.
Some Tiger Moths actually had them fitted as well.
They did, yes, that's right. And the purpose of them was to energize the airflow over the wingtips so that the wingtips didn't stall before the rest of the wing. As the wingtips stall, obviously you lose lateral control. But as I recall in the 626, you could lock them in or out, or lock them in. But and I think it made about 2 or 3 miles per hour difference.
Yeah, almost nothing.
They'd come out with a bang as you got to a certain angle of attack, but they made damn all difference really to the stall speed.
Okay.
It was a very lazy, lovely old machine.
The other thing, of course, the 626 had that I believe, John, was one of the bones of contention you had with Mr. Jaeger was the variable incidence tailplane.
Yes.
He was adamant that the Americans had invented that, and it's the only way that he broke the sound barrier because they had a variable incidence tailplane, and when I pointed out to him on the Avro, that was his end of his viewing of the Avro. He just high
Good memory, Paul. I thought to mention that earlier, and then we sort of moved on. Yes, in fact, the very first one that I can recall is in the SE5A from the First World War, where you can adjust the incidence of the tailplane. So I mentioned that to the general. And he, because the day before he'd been telling us all about this variable incidence tailplane in the
talk to Mum.
what do you call it? What was the Bell X1? That it was too sensitive using elevators, so he figured that if you just left the elevators alone and just adjusted the trim on the tailplane, it was able to damp out this dangerous pitch, getting close to supersonic. And so that was his big story. And then, we pointed out that, in fact, the Avro had something pretty similar. And he just crashed and carried on.
Right, gotcha.
It had three basic settings. You could had three sets of bolt holes. So depending on what it was used for and where your CFG was, you could actually set up the basic setting and then just use the trim wheels for the final trim.
That's interesting. That probably would have been using the third cockpit then, say for something like a stretcher.
Yeah, so if you went all the way back, you could actually then pick another hole and would do that.
That makes sense.
It also could be fitted with floats as well, because it still had some of the float fittings on it.
Okay.
Yeah, so it really was a multi-role aeroplane.
Absolutely. Now, something when I was doing the research for this, I found last night an article from 1989 where the Air Force Museum and the Army were digging a massive sand pit at Kaiapoi, where they found the remains of another Avro 626. I didn't even know about this until last night when I found this thing. They found some wing parts and some other parts, not the whole aircraft. But that's interesting that this other one turned up. And that they didn't know which one it was because they didn't find the data plate. But there are supposedly some other bits around, but I don't know if you guys ever knew about that.
No, didn't know that.
No, never heard of that.
I know, just I suppose less about, not about the aircraft, but about the team. I'm pretty sure it just sort of comes back to me that while we were all posted to the Avro team, our wages were being paid for by other units on base. We were sort of seconded there, so we were sort of stuck in the corner of AMS hangar working on the Avro, but on paper, to keep it all tidy, we actually weren't there at all. We were doing other jobs around the place.
Yeah.
So we were at times an embarrassment, I think, but they wanted to hide us away in the corner of the hangar. But every time that someone important arrived on base or there was something happening, we were on display. So it was, oh, by the way, guys, tomorrow such and such is coming through. Could you all put on clean overalls? Pretty fair to say that everyone wanted it done quickly, but everyone wanted us to be on parade for a lot of the time as well. So it was a little bit difficult at times to achieve both of those aims. And the classic, I think, was the Avro, packing the Avro up, putting it on a Herc or on a truck. I can't remember truck. I think it was taking it down to Wigram for the Royal Tour, and then it literally getting stuck down there for about 6 or 7 weeks. Here we were on the Avro team without an Avro for quite a while. Plenty still to do, but that they wanted it done quickly, but they also wanted us on parade.
Right.
That was quite interesting. They did fly it down in a Herc, and
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and we did meet up with Lady Di and Prince Charles.
That's right.
I
Remember that?
I don't know if you recall, Chips. Keith Braddock's had recently been posted.
That's right.
He did. I've only been here a couple of weeks. What am I supposed to say if they ask me a question? And I said, well, it's pretty easy, Brad. All you got to say is, fucked if I know, I've only been here 2 weeks. And the Princess Diana asked Keith about a particular bit of equipment, and Brad's answer was he was somewhat tongue-tied, shall we say.
Yeah, that was a very memorable occasion that week. Yeah,
very good. Yeah, so of course you're talking about the dreaded establishment, that all bases and units are established with so many people, and you guys were hidden because the RNZAF couldn't be seen to be carrying extra people. So I can't remember where you were hidden exactly, but like I mentioned that Pete Strugnall, as the museum curator, was a second cook in the Airman's Mess or something like that, and his was paid against that.
I'm pretty sure that some of us were actually hidden, in off-base establishments as well as on-base stuff. But, So,
I was a long time serving member of 14 Squadron, if I remember rightly.
yeah.
I was just attached to a Hawker. And
Ah.
then after the project finished, I said, "Am I going back to Wigram?" And they said, "No, you're posted here now." And so I was stuck at a Hawker.
Very good.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
So it's I did speak to Jim Fordyce the other day, and asked him whether he'd like to be involved in this today, and he declined. But he does pass his regards on to everybody.
He's still with us.
Yeah, Jim is 88 years old.
Oh.
Still pretty fit and healthy. He was telling me the other day that he was a bit disgusted because for the first time in his life he's on some form of medication at 88 years old.
Wow. That's pretty good going.
So he's still got a very large 6-wheel camper van which he drives all around the country, and he's still a really active guy.
Oh,
It's good to hear.
good to hear stories like that.
So yeah, he's like I say, he did pass on his regards and thinks fondly of his time on the team. Also, like to mention Peter Lowen, who I haven't been able to get hold of. I've left a message on his phone. He never got back. And the other team member that I remember pretty fondly was Moggy, who spent a lot of time with us as well. So I believe
Was that Moggy Brereton?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I know Brian Mogford.
Brian Mogford.
Oh, Brian Mogford, sorry.
Yeah.
I believe Moggy's retired and living in Renwick, last I heard.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's a few others too, like Keith Braddock, as Paul mentioned earlier. We had a student work experience person for a while, young Jenny Anderson. We had Mike Singleton, the late Mike Singleton, who took over from Jim and took the project towards its final flight, and he was awesome. He had a bit of knowledge to pass on to us as well. We had Merv George.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just trying to think who else we had.
And also Chips Shaw James for a time.
Oh, true.
Yeah.
And then there was Fergie Campbell, was it, who did the wiring? So yeah, there's a few there that.
Tony Mako was also involved in machining side as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely Gary Vincent and his crew supporting us. We couldn't have done the project without them.
Yeah.
And of course, the people in Woodburn who did the engine, Sam Meaglejohn. Yeah. So it was a massive project. While it was the core 4 to 5 of us through the whole project, we couldn't have done it without the support of others. And that must remain with that project, be remembered.
Absolutely, 100%. And I'm so glad that I've got you guys all together here to record this history, because most of this I've never heard, and it's probably been forgotten by the general public and probably even the museum. I mean, none of the people at the museum now were there then. Yeah, true. Well, thanks very much, gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure to record this, and I'm sure that this is going to be of a lot of interest to our listeners. So thanks a lot.
Great to catch up with everyone.
Really good to see you all again too.
Yeah,
Nice
same.
to see everybody.
You're all looking pretty good.
About Buck the other day.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave, for bringing us together. It's brought back a lot of memories.
Absolutely, no problem. Awesome. Thanks a lot, guys.
Cheers, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah,
Take care, guys.
Yes.
Nice
See
talking.
you guys.
See you on the soup.
That was the Wings Over New Zealand show with Dave Homewood.